So we're going to have a panel. We'll have a 30-minute panel discussion right now, and then we'll have 25 minutes for question and answers from you. And I want to introduce first Harry Moskoff, Rabbi Harry Moskoff coming up. He's with the Yark Report, and I think many of you have heard him already. And AnaRina Heymann, I first met AnaRina when we did a story on the city of David, and her breadth of knowledge and heart for the scriptures is so refreshing and inspiring. She's been with the city of David, but now with Align with Zion. So please welcome AnaRina as well. And Joseph, please come and join us on the panel as well. And you've just heard his expertise and breadth of knowledge that is just remarkable. So it's an honor to be here. AnaRina, I think I'll start with you. We did a story with you on the city of David, and by the way, it was one of the most popular stories we've ever done. It just went viral, so to speak, on the internet, and it was inspiring to so many people. And so tell us about the city of David and why it's so important for the archaeological discoveries that have been down there, not only to prove the Bible, but also refute some of the theories that are out there.
Thank you, Chris. Is this okay? I think the city of David and the discovery of that is very, very important because you guys, most of the people sitting here, but for the people also watching, it's the location of the ancient biblical Jerusalem. It's only been rediscovered 150 years ago, and for that I should actually thank Mr. Bob Carnook because he took it out to the people know about it right now, so give credit where credit is due. It's everything else that surrounds the theory that's really a little bit upsetting. I think the most important is to look at the facts. You have to go to the empirical proof that you can find. This goes to everybody that wants to make claims. If UNESCO wants to tell us that there's no biblical connection to Jerusalem, this is the same thing that we tell them. Come to the city of David and come and see it for yourself. If you find seals with the names as written in the book of Jeremiah, and you find a massive tunnel that Hezekiah actually dug, then how can you refute or how can you say that it doesn't exist? So we have to get to the empirical facts. Whatever we found or whatever the archaeologists found in the city of David at that specific spot, there's nothing connected to the temple itself. There was a certain service that happened there, and that's why we believe that it might be the place that when David HaMelech, when King David brought up the ark, that it resided there before Solomon built the temple, but ultimately it went to Temple Mount itself. If you go to the archaeology, and this is a little bit difficult because we can't do archaeology on Temple Mount right now, but a few years back, the WAF wanted to build a mosque. And they literally just dug into what there was and they threw it out in a valley. And we went to collect all that dirt. Dirt is being now sifted from different places. Also what we found closer to the Western Wall. And everything that we found there, they can literally now put together the tiles that was at the Second Temple period. It dates back to the Second Temple period, and it's the tiles of the temple. So why would you find tiles of the temple if they say that there wasn't any temple there? So if you just by seeing what we find in the sifting project, we can slowly put the whole picture together again. The other thing that's very interesting, and I don't know how much was covered, I just want to say that when Eli Shukran went and he found this specific spot, the way that he found it refutes completely the theory itself. When they found it, there was a retaining wall, and it was built up to level this place of where Mr. Carnook puts the theory. And within that was placed stones, literally, intentionally they placed the stones there and they filled it completely up. It was with intention. So the question would be, why would they do that? And that's where we get to Jewish tradition. What I found in the video itself was that he actually attacks the Jewish tradition more than anything else, between the lines. And here it goes about where the temple should stand the moment when we found the place. If we know where the place is, then you can't have any worship anywhere else. Right. So because of that, in the times of Hezekiah, they came and they covered the place. This was a very special place, even for the things that we found there. So it would be hard to cover up that place. That was actually the place where David had the musicians play in the city of David. But the moment when the ark moved, the moment when they inaugurated the temple, that service was done there. You couldn't do anything. And even in the archaeology that we found, it proves that according to Jewish law, they had to block and make sure that the people don't worship in different other places. Right. So by finding this in the archaeology proves that. I just want to see something else that okay. The other question that was raised this morning is, why would we have so much contention on Temple Mount and Hebron and all those places? It tells you where the inflammation is, and the inflammation tells you where the battle is. We don't have a battle at that place where he tells you it is. Obviously, the city of David is a very special place, and we have to give it the kavod and the honor of what it is, and purely by what they find there, it's massive against the battle against UNESCO and what they claim. But let's just trace and see where things are, and you can. Purely by tracing this, you know that whole theory is being refuted.
Harry, AnaRina mentioned the temple sifting project and the tiles that they found. We've done a story on that at CBN News. It's remarkable, and how they've been able to connect that to other tiles that King Herod built around his palaces. What other archaeological evidence have they found through that, and that you're aware of?
Well, one of the things, first of all, good question, Chris, of course, and all the coverage that you do, amazing. One of the things that they found that was mentioned here tonight, several times, I myself also mentioned it, was the Ophel. In that area, the Accra Tower, built by Antiochus IV, Greek king, which is to do right now with Hanukkah, of course. That was a very, very, dramatic find. I guess about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, they really solidified the fact, again, like AnaRina was saying, and Mr. Good, that for sure, the temples had to be, of course, on the Temple Mount. I mean, it's called the Temple Mount, and the reason being that structure, the chakra, which means lechakir, lakor, even in Greek, it actually means to observe. It was built by Antiochus in order to observe the temple service. And if you notice where they actually found it, it's on the south side, on the top of the mountain there, on the south side of Har HaBayit, of the Temple Mount. And it was tall enough to actually to look inside and see, for Antiochus to supervise, quote unquote, the temple workings and the avoda, the service of the priest, etc., in order to see if they're doing everything according to the way he wanted. It says in Maccabees that was actually a big problem, a big thorn as it were, in the side of the Jewish people, because of what he did afterwards and during to the Jewish people. And he was definitely taking away the spiritual side of our service, of our daily service to God. So that was one thing that they found that was very, very important, indicating that, yes, the temple, the way they viewed it, had to be on top of the Temple Mount, perhaps, according to my theory at least, a little bit south of where the Dome of the Rock is today, a little bit closer to the Western Wall, which, by the way, I definitely agree with what Mr. Good said about the Antonia Fortress actually coming onto the Temple Mount itself. That was definitely in conjunction with this find of the Chakra Tower. There are other archaeological discoveries in the area. Definitely, Elisha Kroon, of course, found a whole bunch of different things. The bell of the high priest, the golden bell, which was very, it was kept under wraps for a while. And then, sorry? The white stone. The white stone. There was a bell, there was a stone, that a whole bunch of things that he found that were covered up, as it were. I would say gag order, but he definitely wasn't allowed for a while to pronounce them as being something that relates back to the temple for political purposes. And we find that that's a little bit of a problem that we have to deal with when we do find things that are archaeologically connected to the Second Temple, or even earlier. We get a political process that sometimes provides a bit of an obstacle. So what we do know now is there have been a lot of archaeological proofs, but there are more to come, for sure.
Yeah. You know, the evidence seems overwhelming, and I shared earlier at the panel earlier this evening that somebody gave me this theory about 10 years ago. And my thinking in my mind was, are you kidding? The evidence seems so obvious. Joseph, you've been researching this 35 years. What was your reaction when you first heard about this contrary theory?
I was given the book. I thought it was a joke. I started the book, and I got maybe 6 pages, and I said, I can't read it. It was so preposterous. There were so many misquotes. There were so many, everything taken out of proportion. Now, since that time, since it became something that is like this epidemic, I mean, there literally are millions of people that believe this. I've gone back, I've read the books, I've watched the videos. On one hand, it's really exciting because it shows a hunger to know the temple. But it's scary because people are so easily misled. And how do we communicate? Here's the real evidence. How do we communicate? Look at valid authorities. Talk to your David. You can contact them, City of David. You can contact them. You can ask them questions, and they'll direct you to valid archaeological sources or scholars. Check Hebrew University. Check the Israel Exploration Society. I mean, there's numbers of organizations that will give you who to go to, where to get the information. But yeah, it has become frightening. So I think this is what this conference is in part about, is encouraging everyone here to look at the evidence for yourself, to develop the sources and the resources in order to do these. CBN, by the way, y'all done some tremendous work on some of your documentaries, and I want to commend you. And that would be another place to check the validity of these reports, because there's stuff all over the web that's just not true. It's not even close to true. The tragedy is it is so easy to check out the truth, and people aren't doing it. So please carry that message back to your communities. Tell people that they need to see, and challenge them.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for what CBN News, that's what we try to do. AnaRina, I think what people love about what you share in your messages, the story that we did, is your passion for the city of David. And I remember being down near the Pool of Siloam interviewing you. You said you're one of the most luckiest girls in the world to be able to share this passion. And yet this controversy, this theory gives the city of David, a bad name. I mean, it casts aspersions. It doesn't present the truth. How do you feel about that?
I think the thing that was the hardest for me is when people contact you and they say, listen, do you know about this theory? And you go, we've heard about it. There is not an archaeologist that actually agrees with that. And then there's a lot of aggression that comes back at you, being thrown back at you. I've got a little slide there, if we can pull it up, because I want to show you something that actually happened in the video itself. And I wish that people, this is my grandmother's garden, beautiful little garden, and she loves it. You can press the button there. I have now superimposed on it the Queen's private garden right there. Isn't that amazing? Just because I can superimpose something into a picture doesn't mean that it's real. And this is exactly what happened in this video. And I said my grandmother's garden because it's personal. If you want to do something like that, you bring something personal into, and you mess things up. And that's why I want to tell people, just because there are videos out there, you cannot go purely by what a video tells you. Come to the place. Come see it for yourself. Come walk the ancient pathways while you're there, and then you will be able to understand why there's certain dynamics that needs to take place. So I think that's very important, Chris. And I've got something else that also helped us with understanding something about this, and I just want to mention it quickly. I see Shaul Kulok is actually sitting here today. It's a gentleman that's a mathematician, and he's got a CV this long. And according to also empirical truth, but this time from a mathematical point of view, we found that there was a specific planetary line that led exactly on the temple itself, on the Holy of Holies, in the year of the Babylonian exile. And at the end of those 70 years, that line shifted exactly to the most southern point of the city of David. So even from a planetary view, even from a more mathematical view, this other theory is completely pushed out. So, yeah, that's what we deal with.
Yeah, very nice garden your mother had.
Thank you.
Harry, tell us how you reacted when you heard this first heard this theory.
Well, I wasn't sure that it was real, to be honest. I mean, really, you know. A bunch of people contacted me. In fact, I was inundated to this day, to be honest, about certain things that are going on, whether it's the Ark in Ethiopia or, you know, the temple being somehow in the city of David. I wasn't sure if it was real. Like, people are really, what I found out upon further, you know, research is very simple. Similar to what AnaRina is saying and Joseph, that people are just taking this out of context. They're taking the scriptural verses that he mentions. I think there's about 10 of them anyway, if I remember correctly. And, you know, people are just want to believe, you know, people are believers, quote unquote. And, okay, it could be that archaeologists are wrong. It could be, you know, that the Jews didn't have it quite right all these years or whatever. But the scripture says A, B, C, and D. And you know, I just feel like saying, the very first reaction was, wait a minute, let me see this for a second. And I realized right off the bat that, you know, a lot of these psuki, these verses, are really being taken out of context. Like Joe was saying, you know, you really have to go and see the context and challenge the hypothesis, do the research. I was sort of like, is this really happening? Like, all these people are really believing it. Thousands, tens of thousands of people are actually believing this. And it's, I actually, by the way, I actually wrote the Base Institute and this gentleman about a year ago and challenged him to a public debate here in Jerusalem. And I'm still waiting for that opportunity.
Yeah.
I have a book about it, of course, and every word in that book, the Ark Report, really bases this theory. And sort of what Doron was saying, that there's this replacement theory on steroids type of thing aspect, which is that's the frightening part, and even anti-Semitism to that degree, which, you know, when I thought about it, it was like, could it really be that type of, you know, going to that point? But when I found out later what this gentleman had done and actually went and gave his book and some of the videos to some of my colleagues and friends in the government, Danny Danon and some other people in the government, that you know, he's actually making an attempt to go to the highest levels with this. And of course the Arabs are happy, you know, the Muslims, sure, keep them off the Temple Mount, why not? Yeah, you're right. But no, in fact, so I realized at that point that, yeah, we're dealing with an issue, you know, that has to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I think as Lars had mentioned earlier today, you're all in the position of proving, is water wet? And And Joseph, I had the similar reaction to you when I was watching one of these videos. I couldn't finish it. I really couldn't go. And yet, it's a very, it's a very tempting conclusion. You said at the end of your presentation, you know, it's easy. If the temple's there and the mosque is, if the Dome of the Rock is there, well, there's no problem. We can just go ahead. How do you respond to that?
Pretty much the way that started on this, that in my lecture, is that God set apart a place, and he called it his throne, and he commanded us to learn everything about it, every ceremony, every detail, everything, and that from that point we need to search the evidence. We need to look and see if this will hold up or is it going to fall. And, you know, it's very easy to make it fall. The hard thing is that so many of the people, just as you mentioned, so many of the people aren't looking for truth. Because it's anti-Semitic, because we're dealing with a spiritual thing that is behind all of this, and people will get angry, and they will say, well, you know, I don't care. My advice in that is walk away from it. Don't spend your time arguing with those people. Go to the people that will listen. Talk to them, show them, and continue to learn for yourself. Let it be something that you're doing, not because it's right in the sense of we can prove it. Do it because it's biblically right, because it's what God commanded us to do, and it's how that we're to worship, and it's where he teaches us about approaching him and all of these things. Do it for those motivations. I would like to say one thing about the city of David. The city of David is a fantastic place. When we study the temple, we don't just study the temple. We study the Shiloh pool, and we study the road that came up, that the pilgrims came. Whenever I go up right now, we go a short ways up the actual road, and then we go into a drainage channel. By the time I get up close to the temple, I'm already in heaven. Because I see, in my mind, I see everything. I see the people coming out to worship. There's great news. I got a sneak peek at it. I'm sure you've seen it. They are completing the old upper road. And we're going to be able to go down that road and go as the ancient pilgrims went. And that you've got to do. I don't care if you live on the moon. It's worth the trip.
Chris,
Yeah, go ahead, AnaRina.
This road is on the western side of the city, and where the other theory places this, they built this massive road leading to nothing.
To the Fortress Antonio.
Yeah, because and there's no road leading up to where they put this theory. So the road by itself also refutes.
Yeah. The archaeological finds. Yeah, go ahead. The archaeological finds there are just simply amazing, and I used to park in the Givati parking lot as well. Yeah. And where the visitor center is now, it used to be a little orchard, and so but what's happened in the last 15 years is simply astounding. And as you say, AnaRina, it's like the dust is shaking off of Jerusalem. Take us from the physical to the spiritual. How important is what's happening here in the city of David right now?
I think that's the most important for what we wanted to establish here today is how, if we veer from understanding what the physical is, we veer spiritually as well. The city of David, the moment when when the city itself shakes off its dust, we can see how it basically has a spiritual, it shakes the heavens. When that happens. If you open up this primordial city, The only thing that she's calling out for is for her sons to come back. When we open up this ancient road, in the time when we open up the ancient road, and this is a verse that you can find in Ecclesiastes where it says, 3 verse 15, after everything there's a time for this and a time for that, it says what is was, what will be was. So there are cycles, and if you open up the physical on these cycles, then we are getting ready for the future as well. So as we are opening up this massive road, the roads to Israel are also being set in place. We have the speed train that you can now literally in 20 minutes get from Ben Gurion to Jerusalem. It's working, right? I just want to make sure. And then they're also working on places that they can literally, with cable cars, bring people right into to Temple Mount, into the city of David. So every time when we're uncovering the ancient paths, it wakes people up to come back. And whatever we are doing in the spiritual, in the physical, it has tremendous effect in the spiritual as well.
Yeah. Be thinking of any questions. We'll take questions in a few minutes. But before, as I said earlier, at any interview, my last question would like to be anything you'd like to add. So Harry, and then Joseph, and then AnaRina. Anything you'd like to add that we haven't discussed yet?
No, nothing. No. Just joking. That's probably, you don't hear that often. Well, just a couple of little things here and there, I guess. One is, in terms of archaeological discoveries, the Temple Mount, the heart by it, if you look at some of the people part of my project, Dr. Gabi Barkai, with the sifting project you were mentioning. So we found over there arrowheads going all the way back to the Babylonian conquest, to Nebuchadnezzar, all the way back to the destruction of the first temple, the Solomonic temple, which is an unbelievable find, and that's something that's going to, it's published and it's coming out. You can actually see these amazing arrowheads. You can look it up. That's one thing that goes even predates the Second Temple, the Herodian Temple, the Antonian Fortress, all the way back. So this is something that's very, very important archaeologically. Everything that's being found now is part of the temple sifting project and other projects in the area. The other thing is there is progress being made on a political level. As we were mentioning that elections are coming up, and we do want to make the Temple Mount an issue, an item to be discussed. It's very important. And that's why, conventions, conferences like this one do play an important part and do get both wanted and unwanted, probably, attention from different, there's left and there's right, and here in Jerusalem, you can sneeze on the left, it'll be interpreted one way, sneeze on the right, another way, you can never do, it's Israel. It's Israel, yeah, exactly. So, Baruch Hashem, thank God that this is taking place, and there are progress, there is progress being made. There's politically, there's supposedly one thing I'll say about the whole peace process, the U.S. brokered process, is that they're planning a train, actually, for the first time, all the way from Saudi Arabia and Oman, for instance, to come in the UAE, all the way to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, through Jordan, called the peace train, quote unquote. Kind of cheesy, but okay. But it really is happening. It really is, and there is, that infrastructure is being laid. So we do have a couple of things that are promising in terms of getting people over to the Mount, Jews and non-Jews, Muslims also. There is something great that's going to be happening, and I really feel, that as many of us do here, I think, that we are on the verge of something great, a messianic era, whatever you call it, something that's going to come to fruition, and it's going to be a great time. So there is a lot to look forward to with this.
Great. Joseph?
Yeah, I've got one thing that I'd like to share. Frequently, what we hear from people, from Christians, is, I don't need to study a building. I don't need to study the temple because I'm the temple. We're the temple, we're the body of the temple. Let me tell you something. That is not a Christian statement. That is a Jewish statement. That is something that from the very beginning, Jews were taught that there is a physical temple, but there is a that the body of Israel is the temple of God. Okay? So what does all this mean? Well, if you want to understand yourself and your body of believers as a temple, you need to understand the physical temple. You need to be involved in what God put there for you to be able to understand identity, who you are, what you are. Now, understand this, that as non-Jews, we have a duty and a responsibility as believers in Hashem to support the Jewish people. It's not a suggestion, it's actually a commandment. Now, in that, we need to support the Jewish right to prayer on the Mount. We're promised that we'll have blessings that come to the entire world. We're told, I believe in the Midrash, that if the Romans had known the value of the temple, they would have taken all the legions of Rome to surround and protect it. So we're able to be involved in that. Now, I go up on the temple. I plan, when the temple is rebuilt, I plan on going up into the temple, into the section that non-Jews can go in. I don't want to go in the sections that Jews can go in. Not that I would love to sin. I can sin in my mind. I want to be who I am before God and do what God allows me to do. And I want to support them to do what He gives them to do. And that in that, we become Jew and non-Jew together, worshiping before the throne of God. That's it.
Right on.
Again, if you have any questions, Joy will be over here in AnaRina. Anything you'd like to add?
Just to thank the diehards that are here to that sat to the end here, and also the people that really watched. I think those who really wanted to seek the truth tuned in today to really understand. And it's for them that we're happy to do this. I just want to say, on the city of David, as we know, it was only rediscovered 150 years ago. It ticked exactly on the Jubilee cycles, which is amazing in itself as well. But the rediscovery tells us now where Zion actually lies. It lies outside of the temple, of the old city, except for Temple Mount. And as we are now being able to mentally make that shift to the true location of Zion itself, of Zion itself, we should actually do that prayerfully, spiritually, and psychologically as well. So from my side, I would just like to ask people to align with Zion, to make sure that keep it in your mind's eye when you pray, like Daniel, and tell as many people as you possibly can about this, because this is pivotal for us moving forward in the exciting times that are coming. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Sure. I guess Daron gets the first question.
All right, I'll take the first question. I want a short one. Whoever one of you wants to take this, I think a good question to ask or to consider is the issue of the Temple Mount myth. Is there a correlation to that myth and, for example, the flat earth people? If you understand what I'm talking about, in the effects of that, the way we accept these myths based on the availability of, in the quickness of social media and internet, et cetera, in pushing these ideas to huge masses of people to believing these myths, and you know, you get what? Do you understand the question?
Who wants to start?
Okay. So the question is like the flat Earth and the relationship of the flat Earth. My people perish because of lack of knowledge, and we're plagued right now with so many things that indicate a real spiritual shallowness in those that say they're believers in Hashem and believers in Yeshua. Not among all people, but the numbers are alarming. So there needs to be a concerted effort to, number one, to confront these myths, to confront these lies, and to be able to say, look, here's what we have. Do prep work before you talk to somebody. Have your information in order. Have good sources. Be able to lay it out. Again, I would repeat, if somebody just wants to argue, I would wipe my feet and go on. Go to the next person. But don't let the lies just be, don't let them just, I don't address them. They have to be addressed. They have to be confronted. And again, it's all going to come back to the Jews changed this. The Jews changed that. It's anti-Semitic. It has one main source it's coming from, and that's the enemy. And it comes in different forms. But the flat earth, the lunar Sabbath, I think is what another one that they call. I don't know if you're involved in that or even know what I'm talking about. But that the Sabbath is not the Sabbath. That the Jews have that wrong. And that they changed this, okay? Just understand the source, but get your information and confront it. Okay.
AnaRina or Harry, you want to address that or go to the next question?
Really 2 seconds. The only thing I wanted to add is that really was mentioned before is that I think that it is a spiritual, it's like a spiritual war that we're facing here. It's not just physical, it's not just about where the temple is or isn't. There are spiritual forces now that are, darkness is the darkest before the dawn, right? So it is a fight, and we're going to win. We will. Hashem will win.
Next question.
Hey, so I have two quick questions. The first one, I generally agree with what you guys said. I also was totally shocked when I heard about this conspiracy theory, and I live here in Jerusalem, so I was like, where did these guys get these ideas from? Anyway, I looked at some of their circumstantial evidence, and it makes me wonder, maybe there's a grain of truth. Maybe, for example, in the city of David, that David kept the ark there for a while. Is there any archaeological evidence of David keeping it, or maybe Melchizedek maybe having some sort of like little something, altar or something like that in the city of David? Is there any possibility of that?
Okay, to come to the first one, that we said that there's a high probability that the place where they sort of state that the temple was actually the place where the temple, the ark was kept in the interim phase. So it's a high probability, especially if you go and see where that is. The Matzeva that you're speaking about, Eli Shukrun also speaks very highly of it, that it might be from the times of Melchizedek, to my understanding. The only thing that we know about that stone is that they keep it away from how can I say? I don't want to say from the public, but it is a place that we have to protect. Yes, because they know that whatever the meaning or the significance of the stone is, it's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Next question.
Sorry, I just want to add, if I may, a very short point on what AnaRina just said. That at the end of King David's life, there's a midrash that says, and I believe also in the Talmud, a reference that actually says that David moved the ark from that point, where it was temporarily in the city of David, over to where put it this way, now it's called the Mount Zion, where King David is buried. He actually mentioned, and there's a reference to this, that he wanted to be buried where the provincial tent of the ark was. So before he passed away, we know that the ark moved actually to the current, what we now call the Mount Zion, where King David is buried, where he has his, his tomb, basically. So it was there as well. It sort of moved in transit from City of David, but later became also called Ir David later on. And this is something maybe we'll hear more about. That the Ir David was actually called, sort of switched at the latter part of King David's life, also to refer to what we now know as as the Mount Zion where he's buried. So the ark was actually there in that place for a while at the end there, before being moved into the temple.
One of the concerns that I believe that the Christians have concerning the reestablishment of the temple is the reinstitution of sacrifices. And for those who have not studied the difference between the sacrifices and understanding why the peace offerings are still supposed to be given, could you address that also in light of the lack of understanding concerning the importance of not eating things like halal meats, which are pervasive through America, even not having to be recorded on the packages that you buy, so they're eating foods that are not even, these things are tied together. Could you address that issue so that maybe it can spark the interest of the Christians out there to study the importance of this topic?
All right. What I'll do is I'll address at least the first part of the question, but just before I do, in answer with all due respect to the gentleman before that, the Jerusalem that he's referring to be built is the one that he's standing in right now. Okay. This is the Jerusalem that we're in right now. That's what's being rebuilt. Thank God. Now, that's right. It's expanding every day. Now, with respect, it's a good question with respect to sacrifices. This really is an issue. In fact, a lot of places that wanted to take my book, different, all kinds of community centers, Christian and all kinds of other faiths. One of the directors that came up to me said, "Your book is awesome. Problem is, it mentions the temple, which is great, but it mentions sacrifices, that sacrifices will be reinstated." First of all, not all, you have to know which ones will be and which ones won't be. According to the Torah, the majority of sacrifices when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes and we have the third temple, will not be held. The Passover sacrifices and the ones we do on Sukkot and the Feast of Tabernacles and others that we do, there's only two that will remain. One, and then as the lady was saying, that we have to understand the nature of the sacrifices and why we bring them. The one that will remain is called the Thanksgiving sacrifice, where we give thanks to God for what we have, especially for being saved from certain things, from, that we, for instance, traveling overseas, which many of you have come. Thank you for coming. We give a Thanksgiving sacrifice for that, or other, life saved, when a person's life is saved miraculously or not, or getting out of prison. There's all kinds of different definitions. But when, in the future, when the temple is reinstated, this sacrifice will, for any people, anybody, Jew and non-Jew, can bring this sacrifice, this Thanksgiving sacrifice. The other one that will be there is called the Korban Tamid, which is the one that we give in the morning and the one that we give at night, which is an olah. It's a special sacrifice that's given, which really is given not only for the glory of God, but also to keep up the temple service. It's actual practical thing. But all the other sacrifices will not be. So there is something that, you have to really know exactly what we're talking about and the reasons behind the sacrifices, etc., which makes sense. The second part of the question, with reference to halal meat, I'm not a pro about that, but there are many. It's not for a Jew, for a religious Jew. It's not permitted to eat anything other than kosher meat, which is there's, of course, here in Israel everything is political, so that also is a matter of opinion. What's kosher meat? That's for another conference, but basically, yeah. But essentially, a religious Jew can't eat halal meat, but halal meat does have certain similarities to kosher meat. It's also slaughtered. It's not just, the cow isn't just like shot, and religious Muslims do adhere by that strictly, and also eat kosher meat as well, which is an even stricter form of kashrut, how do you say kashrut? kosher, observance. So whether a non-Jew can eat halal meat or not is that's another discussion. I've never heard personally that it's forbidden for a non-Muslim to eat halal meat. I'm not sure where that personally comes from, but there may be a source to it. In the meantime, though, I think that, look, at the end of the day, if it brings people together, if people can respect the other person's dietary laws, which we have here, actually, everything was kosher. Thank you. That's a start. Yeah.
Right. John, you get the next question.
Yeah, my question pertains to the water sources on the Temple Mount. And we were discussing with Rico Cortez earlier that there's a wonderful cistern or something underneath, kind of just southeast of where the altar would have been. And it kind of points up towards the temple. It's kind of elongated, a key cistern. Is there any use for, any clues in that cistern to some drain off the roof of the actual temple building?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct. The cistern you're referring to is, Comrade Schick called it Cistern 28, and Charles Ward called it Cistern 5. In the Second Temple period, it was not a cistern. It was a tunnel system. Now, we believe that this tunnel system was used to, it was a key to the water supply. In other words, down inside this tunnel, they had a pumping system to a cistern below it. And so, number one, that's how that particular system is called a fixed cistern or fixed well. So, I have a friend that years ago, she worked down at Ir David, and her specialty was the water. She is one of the leading authorities here in Jerusalem on the ancient water supply. Now, she worked with me on this. And basically, what we dealt with is in the Mishnah, it says that this is a fixed well. Okay, so what's a fixed well? I mean, a well is a well. So if you have a fixed well, what does it mean? Well, what we believe it means is that it was fed by a spring underneath, so that it had a constant, permanent supply of water. Wasn't dependent on rainwater. It wasn't dependent on water being transferred to it by conduits. It had its own water supply. So that's one of the big mysteries, or one of the big things that we see in this particular system, or cistern or tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, there's a little drain on the surface of the Temple Mount that comes down into the tunnel. That drain has a conduit that goes back. The conduit is very short. It would be, I'm going to guess, from me to you. It's a very short conduit. Now, that conduit, we located several what we call points of congruence, something that Jim uses as points of congruence, things that we can identify. And we arrived at the size of the cubit. We arrived at where the temple building was. We could divide it down into the widths of the walls, the widths of the stairways, the widths of the offices, the width of the Holy of Holies or the holy place, and so forth. There is what is described in Midot in the Mishnah. There's a drain that comes off the top of the temple building. It starts on the western side. It comes east to the bottom. Now that drain is called the Beit Hordat Habayim. Okay, it's the drain for any rainwater, snow, anything that collects on the temple building to come down. Turns out that when we put all this together, we found that conduit that was drawn 100 years ago by the Palestine Exploration Fund, they discovered it, the one that goes from me to you, that empties into cistern 28 or tunnel 28 comes exactly to the place that this drain off the top of the Temple Mount would empty. So we believe that that is precisely, having that measurement, it allows us to get the exact measurements for almost all the buildings and structures, gates, on the Temple Mount, the location of the altar. It was like the key that unlocked it all.
Wow. We're going to have to limit it to 2 more questions. So,
I hope that my question is quick. You all have done a fantastic job of dismantling the Martin alternate temple theory, temple location theory. However, the attraction to the theory, how do I say this, it's a monster with lots and lots of tentacles, and there just isn't time to address all of those issues. Unfortunately, I could bring up, maybe a few facts that support the Martin theory that hasn't been addressed today. Is there a resource that someone can turn to that perhaps methodically goes through and demonstrates point by point why this theory is foolishness, instead of just saying, this is why it can't be, and you've done a good job of saying it wasn't in City of David. Awesome, great job. What about all the other dozens of details or facts that seem to support the theory? Where can we turn to?
I've got some lectures that go for a few hours. I'd be glad to come and do a 10-hour session on it.
How about you, AnaRina?
I just want to say it's not point by point, it's layer by layer, because there are things that he addresses at one level that actually kicks out on a completely different level. So it's a psychological thing that's much deeper. I don't know if anybody's going to be able to put a point-by-pointer there. Maybe if you can write down the points by point, then maybe we can start looking at them and see how we can dismantle it. But that's a massive job to really go look into this video and to...
It's a massive beast.
Yeah. Harry, go ahead.
Well, when you have a massive beast, in my opinion, sometimes it's not worth it to give it the attention. It's just not, because the more attention you give it, the more credibility you give it to a certain degree. If you really want a point-by-point breakdown, that's going to take, hours and a lot of work, and it's not worth it, in my opinion. That's about it.
Yeah. Go ahead, a final question.
So I would like to move to a vision forward, which is going all the way to the millennial and the millennial kingdom and Messiah is here. Then we're looking at the Ezekiel temple. So what do you see as being the relation to, between the temple that will now be built, as all the pictures, all the kind of drawings and the Temple Institute, they seem to be, it looks like it would be like the second temple. But then if you look at the Ezekiel drawing, it seems to be something different. And Marita, I think you mentioned Ezekiel 43, which was referring to a different kind of temple. So how do you see the relationship between these two, and how will the transfer be between these two?
I think I understand what you're saying, is that the pictures we see that they're making for the next temple seem to be after the model of the second temple, and not after the Ezekiel temple. Yes. Well, the temple that we're preparing to build right now has to be built according to the blueprint of the last existing temple. When Messiah comes, after that point, it'll go to the Yehezkel temple. All of that will still be called the third temple, because like the second temple had 3 phases, the Ezra temple or Zerubbabel, the Hasmonean, and the Herodian, because it was in one continuous span without a break. It was called the second temple. So we'll build according to the model of the last until Messiah comes, and then we don't have enough detail in Yehezkel to build that temple yet, till he comes.
I just want to say I'm not an authority on this to tell you exactly what the differences are going to be, but if you go to the people from the Temple Institute, they have studied the laws in depth, And what they drew up there is obviously according to deep halachic sources that they went into. And I think you should get somebody like that to really explain to you the differences and why they, because they already had some blueprints, they have blueprints ready. So they would be the best to answer that question.
I would like to add one thing that I do remember regarding this topic, that it says in the Talmud that those who built, that Ezra and Nehemiah that built the second temple actually took 4 things from Yechezkel's temple, Ezekiel's temple, in the effort, with the view to try and make the second temple a permanent temple, like Yechezkel's temple will be. So they took 4 things because they really wanted the second temple to be permanent. It lasted 420 years, 10 years longer than the first temple, than King Solomon's temple. But one of these things was, for instance, in the women's courtyard, the 4 chambers on the perimeter had open ceilings. Like they're straight up. They didn't have a roof. That is straight out of Ezekiel. That element is straight out of Ezekiel, and that was taken on purpose and used in the second temple all the way to the end, to the Herodian structure as well. That's just one example. There are 3 other examples that they actually used. They took from Ezekiel for that purpose. Hope that helps.
Yeah, and I was going to answer the previous question about where to get some information. I would certainly recommend Joseph Good's information, AnaRina and Harry Moskoff, as well as Cry for Zion. And as I said earlier, I'd be remiss not to say CBN News as well. So, so thank you, AnaRina, Joseph, and Harry for an excellent panel and very insightful.